Hello and welcome to the Jonesing for Sports podcast, the ultimate podcast for Michigan sports, both college and pro. I am your co-host Cody, joined by my brother Brandon, and I want to give a special welcome to all of our fans who are fans of back-to-back Big Ten championship teams. Shout out to you guys. Gotta get my licks in now because who knows what's going to happen over the course of the next week. We're, of course, joined by Cody Tooltime Thomas to break down the game of all games, the matchup between Michigan and Ohio State taking place in Ann Arbor this weekend. Tooltime, thanks for joining us.
Excited to be here. It's always a good time when we can all be on the pod together. If the U.S. and Trinidad and Tobago game that happened tonight is any indication of what's going to happen this weekend, then one of us is going to leave an extremely upset fan base over something very controversial, losing to a team that we think we probably had no business losing to. So I was already feeling the stress. I'm already having trouble sleeping, and now I'm going to be awake over that as well. So this is potentially setting up to just be a truly awful week.
Yeah, for those that didn't get a chance to watch the game, could you give a current state of affairs update for the USMNT? So, with Trinidad and Tobago, how did that match go? How are things looking? I didn't get to watch the match. Kind of seems like the U.S. is back to same old Berhalter ball, pretty uninspired. What have you seen from those matches?
Oh, my gosh. How much possession can you have without a shot on goal? It's the absolute worst. And then we literally got a red card and lost tonight. Yeah, I'm really hoping that U.S. Soccer recognizes quickly this was a mistake. And I would rather them just come out and say, everyone, we are sorry. This was bad. We are hosting the World Cup. We're hosting Copa America next year. We don't want to go into it bad. We will fix this right now. Of course they won't, because U.S. Soccer is the equivalent of the NCAA. So nothing's going to change. But anyways, that's probably enough soccer for tonight.
Yeah, for sure. I just was talking to Trav about that earlier as he was watching the game. A notable exclusion from tonight's podcast. He's been kicked off. Actually, he's been working hard, training for a new job, so kudos to him. We miss you, Trav. But he was telling me he was actually cheering for Trinidad just because it's just so sickening to watch right now. So yeah, we'll have plenty of other disgusting takes to get out of the way on this pod, but appreciate that quick update. We got a fair amount to talk about, boys, but should we just go ahead and get it started with a good old-fashioned comparison?
Absolutely.
Or is there any... Okay, awesome. So, go ahead,
Cody and I on the Football Frenemies podcast usually keep things nonsense-free, not so much on the Jonesing for Sports podcast, so we're going to baptize Cody Tooltime Thomas into our shenanigan ways. And I'm always curious how much momentum a team has and how much does it really matter. Because I think that we're seeing two programs kind of going in different directions right now. And we'll take the temperature on how Ohio State and Michigan are looking going into the game. By the way, before we do this, just to put the gravity of this game, this is honestly the game that is going to be with this much on it, because we're looking at divisions going away, and so most likely in a situation where both teams are undefeated, it will be a rematch the very next week. Not only that, you won't be playing for a playoff spot because it's a 12-team playoff. So the loser of this game, barring absolute chaos, which is, I would say, unexpected because last year Ohio State got in after USC fell apart, a lot more than just USC would have to fall apart for the loser to make the playoff this year. So this is for a playoff spot. Last year of the East and West Division, I'm going to miss it. So we have to cherish this, even though I think as Michigan fans we're thinking, man, we're not playing with a full deck right now. So momentum-wise, how do we want to compare this? Cody, you want to explain what we're doing?
So I'll
say Cody and I'll say Tool Time.
I was gonna say let's let it be that. So I'd love to. So we never talk about Marvel on this pod ever. Never happens. So we figured just to give a quick little comparison, that we would talk about the MCU and different points in the MCU when the whole franchise had momentum and maybe when it didn't. If we're comparing Michigan and Ohio State to an MCU, to the MCU, at what point in its entire lifespan would each team currently be residing? And also, how much does that really matter? I guess we'll get into that with the second half of the question. Does anybody want to get us started there with just where at in the MCU you see Michigan or Ohio State currently?
Let's sandwich this. So we'll get Michigan, Ohio State, and then Michigan because we've got 2 Michigan fans on this pod. So I'll go ahead and start us off. Michigan right now is entering the biggest game of the year, and we are down our faithful commander. And we're also down one of our lieutenants because Chris Partridge, who is dumb and try to delete, computer files that were about the NCAA investigation and got fired. So we're down a defensive coach, we're down our head coach. And now our offensive coordinator and offensive line coach is also our head coach. So it's a tough spot we're in, being down some of our main characters. And this is kind of where in the MCU post Endgame, we are now in an MCU without Captain America. We no longer have Iron Man, and we're moving on to some newer, fresher characters. And so after Endgame, we enter Phase 4, and you have a mixed bag of movies in Phase 4. I think you have some bangers like Spider-Man No Way Home. This is a controversial movie, I guess, but I really did enjoy Doctor Strange. There's also some really bad ones, like I think Eternals was terrible. You have Thor, Love and Thunder, which was, dare I say, blasphemous. I mean, they're just terrible. And Shang-Chi was really good. I want to throw that one out there. I really enjoyed that one. But it's kind of 50-50. Like, is the movie going to suck or is it going to be really enjoyable? And that's kind of how I view this game. We're not playing with our main characters. Jim Harbaugh is a big part. He's a huge part of the Michigan identity and the team itself. And without him, it's going to be hard to move forward. Just like it's really difficult to picture the MCU without our favorites, Iron Man and Captain America. But we press on, and we hope that the coin, when it's flipped, lands our way, because it's either really bad or it's pretty good, pretty enjoyable. That's where I'm at momentum-wise.
I'm actually going to jump in right there because I also picked Phase 4, particularly just because of the movies that are in Phase 4. Like you said, it was pretty middling. You get some good, some bad, but even just going movie by movie, you got Black Widow first. Cupcake non-con without Harbaugh. We looked like hot doo-doo. Michigan did not look good, and we're like, is this team even going to be close to the expectations that we've placed upon them at the beginning of the year? But then, after Black Widow, you get Shang-Chi, and we just start smacking around everybody. Life is good again. Michigan is the dominant powerhouse team with a balanced offense to boot. Now we can throw the ball. This is awesome. Shang-Chi, awesome movie. And then right after that, we get Eternals. And, all this crap comes out that Michigan's involved in illegal activities, and it sucks. We don't know what the future of the franchise is going to look like going forward. Just a massive, massive gut punch for the season and just for the school collectively. But then right after that, you get Spider-Man No Way Home. We sucker punch MSU 49-0. That makes everything feel better. Just beating up on the Spartans. They're huddling, thinking that's going to solve something, and they don't have a prayer. And so, you still got the lingering investigation and all that, but for now, life is good. Penn State, a little bit of a mixed bag, but you got the dub, and I enjoyed it. So that's Multiverse of Madness right there. It's a good film. But then right after that, for me, things are going pretty well. You have Thor, Love and Thunder, and then Black Panther 2, which apparently is a controversial one. Brandon and I have the opinion that that was not anything to write home about. Tool Time, how did you feel about Black Panther 2?
Get him started.
I was right with you guys. We were there at dinner with Mr. Gershom Tedeschi, greatest resident director of all time at Grace College, who was just completely taken aback that we could even think that a villain that gets defeated by a hairdryer is not entirely a great film. So there are good aspects about that movie, but it is definitely not in the upper echelon. It is, to me, it definitely fit in that one that it was good, it was fine. I do not see a reason to watch it again, but I've seen the original Black Panther like so many times. It's such a watchable movie.
Yeah, well put. And Brandon, question for you: what is a worse film, Thor: Love and Thunder or Eternals?
Wow.
Oh man, that's really tough. I'm gonna say Thor because it has a foundation to stand on. So like, I'm more emotionally attached to Thor, but Eternals had the ability, I think, to like start something new and fresh. Like, I think Eternals had the opportunity to do what Guardians 1 did, and it just completely whiffed. So Eternals is right up there. I think it's so bad, just a terrible film. But the weight of expectations, Thor standing on the top of 3 other movies, which I enjoyed. I'm kind of a weirdo, and I liked Thor 1 and 2. Didn't love them, but I didn't hate them like a lot of people. And then I loved Ragnarok. So the fact that those 3 movies are setting the stage, and then Love and Thunder was it's terrible. It makes me sick. I want to throw up on the script of Thor: Love and Thunder. Just awful writing. Try again. Actually, don't. Never try again. Stop doing that.
Well, if you're a Michigan fan, you hope that this is where the movie comparison ends. But if it doesn't, the Eternals, that's the ongoing NCAA investigation and the Big Ten investigation. And then Love and Thunder would be a loss to Ohio State, which would end in a loss in whatever bowl game we ended up in with Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, which is just the all-time worst timeline, worst reality for a Michigan fan. So hopefully this is where it ends. But I'm not so sure. There's going to be a lot we're going to have to dissect tonight, and honestly, my opinions might even change as we continue discussing. But, Tool Time, I want to hear what your comparison would be for where Ohio State's at in the MCU.
Yeah. For the sake of diversity and just wanting to be a little bit different, I wrote down going into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is where I see Ohio State right now. So we literally feel like we're in the exact same position right now, which is kind of ironic. For me, MCU phases 1, 2, and 3 was the Tressel and Urban Meyer eras, like kind of combined. Like those were just riddled with winners, Big Ten championships, national title appearances, national title wins, only like one real loss to Michigan during that period. Like it was just, everyone said the MCU was now the greatest IP of all time. And in terms of Big Ten territory, that's how we felt about Ohio State. Well, that narrative has started to shift over the past couple seasons, kind of the way Phase 4 did. We were like, oh, now we're going out of an unprecedented era, and how are we going to feel with everything that's new? Even looking in the Ryan Day era, there's parts of it that were really, really good that we loved, but it's not trending in the right direction. The reason why I feel that it's Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness going into it is because Phase 4 started off really, really choppy. Just kind of like Ryan Day did with that loss to Oregon, even before we even got to that first Michigan game in 2021. And then it kind of started to keep going, and you kept questioning yourself, and you kept wondering things, and you kept saying, like, what is happening? What's different? Why is it not the same? And a lot of it was, some of the guys you had before are just gone. There's still a few characters around you love, like, Spider-Man is still around, Loki is still around, Doctor Strange is still around, but we're missing so many of the ones that we love. J.K. Dobbins is not around, Justin Fields is not around, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are not around, Chase Young, Jeff Okuda, Sean Wade, all these guys that we loved are not around. There's still some. We love Marvin Harrison Jr., who, we might say is our favorite of all of them, just like tons of people say Spider-Man is their favorite in all of them. Love Travion Henderson. I think he's been the most underrated OSU player in the last few years. Big fan of Tommy Eichenberg, but there's been a lot to be desired. But I would say this season so far was like Spider-Man No Way Home. It's rejuvenated you. It's given you new energy. It's given you new life. But now you're waiting for it to be followed up. Because before the season started, everyone was saying OSU could be 9-3. There were even some takes where people said OSU might be 8-4. They were already counting Michigan, Penn State, and Notre Dame as losses for us. They thought we'd lose at home to Penn State. They thought we'd lose on the road to Notre Dame and Michigan. And there was even a decent amount of people saying we could lose Wisconsin as well. Luckily, Ohio State, honestly, I don't know how we beat Notre Dame. That was kind of lucky. But the rest of it since then, we've kind of put our foot down and showed that even if we're not the OSU teams of old, we are still Ohio State. We are still the dominant team when all these other teams come to play us. And so it's given us new hope. It's given us that, but there's still things that you're not right with. Even though we just beat Minnesota 37-3, I still am not comfortable with Kyle McCord. I'm still just not there. Even though we didn't give up a touchdown, I'm still just not very happy with how much our defense plays in the opposing offense's backfield. I'm not thrilled with sometimes how little we throw the ball to possibly the best football player in the planet, including all leagues. So there's so many things that have rejuvenated me in actually thinking we could do this, which most of the season I didn't think we could. But I'm actually sitting here believing I think we can. I think it's possible. But just kind of like the way I felt with Doctor Strange was like, okay, it's phase 4. Like, I have to see it to believe it. And I'm hoping it doesn't end up the same way I felt about Doctor Strange. Maybe it'll end up the way other people who loved it, like Brandon. So maybe it'll work out that way. But I definitely feel like right now with OSU, I'm in the exact same place as when we were going into Multiverse of Madness.
All right, so I've got 2 questions before we move on. Number 1, the important question. You referred to phases 1 through 3 as the Tressel and Urban Meyer eras at Ohio State. So I've got to know, what phase 1 through 3 character is Urban Meyer?
Probably Tony Stark. He's not perfect.
That would have been my answer,
He's definitely made mistakes. There's some shady things, but at the end of the day, he was the one who got the job done. At the end of the day, Urban Meyer is the one who got the job done. He won the national championship, won a lot of Big Ten titles, was 7-0 against Michigan. I feel like Tony Stark is probably the correct comparison. It's definitely not Captain America. That's for certain.
All right, so actually the important question is, does the momentum of our teams mean anything? Because if we go back, let's just go 1 year. Michigan probably should have lost to Illinois the week before Ohio State, and then goes to Columbus and gets the win. We go back, I think it was 2018, where Ohio State probably should have lost to Maryland, and then goes on and just destroys Michigan. So those are just, a couple instances where the momentum didn't tell the full story, but I still think it probably matters. So what do you guys think? Is it important how these teams are looking going into the game, or is it just fresh start, the game happens, and whatever happens it's almost irrelevant how the team looked the weeks before?
It's a fresh start. I mean, if you look at both games this past weekend, Michigan, Ohio State, the moment the players got the talk, they did not care about the game they just played. They were talking about Michigan was talking about Ohio State. Like, I saw the one with Mike Sainristil. He very, very quickly went to Ohio State when it came to talking post-game. And OSU players did the same thing. They very, very quickly went to Michigan. So, honestly, no, I don't think the momentum matters. Because look at 2021 when Michigan actually changed it. OSU was coming off beating Michigan State 49-0 at halftime in a top 10 matchup when Stroud had thrown for 6 touchdown passes and had like 350 yards. So that was the absolute most momentum that you could have had going into it. And so, honestly, no, I don't think momentum does. Go back to the 2013 matchup. Michigan was struggling. Michigan was kind of spiraling downwards, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Devin Gardner pulls this 450-yard, like, 4-passing TD that they had a chance to win at the end going for 2 when Ohio State was playing very well going into that game. Braxton Miller and Carlos Hyde were basically unstoppable, and Michigan, at minimum, went toe-to-toe with them that year when, as I said, Michigan was basically spiraling after starting like 5-0, and then they were like 7-6 going to that game or whatever. So,
I tell you what, Brady Hoke clapped his heart out that game. I mean, just dedication from first quarter to fourth, clapped the whole way through.
Dude, he must have been preparing for Ohio State every single game all season because there's a lot of questionable results during that. But he always played close, even in Ohio State's national championship year in 2014. That game was not really sealed until 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter when Darren Lee had the strip sack that went to the end zone. So that's the one thing you can give Brady Hoke credit for. He always played that game pretty well.
Yeah, we don't slander Swaggy B here. Cody, what do you think?
I think Tool Time's right, and at the same time, it feels different because in years past, you can look at results immediately coming off of one team or the other, trending in opposite directions. But we don't really have a precedent for this where one team is just without their head coach who was just suspended. And, it's got a whole new look, this Michigan team. Now, all of a sudden, we got Sharon Moore, who has got the responsibilities of head coach, OC, and offensive line. And it just looks like lately he's a little bit out of his depths. I have no doubts that he's a good coach, and I like what he does for Michigan. But this is it's a new look for them. And when you think of Michigan going up against Illinois was a sneaky good team when Michigan played them.
Team.
What's that?
There was a lot of NFL talent on that team.
Yeah,
Devin Witherspoon,
Sidney
and Brown.
Brown was the guy I was trying to think of. He was a menace on the ground that year. Massively underrated.
Sidney Brown was the safety. His twin, or I don't know, his twin or just brother.
Brother.
I can't remember his first name. Something Brown, obviously.
Chase Brown.
It was Chase Brown. I just heard Brown. Yes,
Chase
Brown is the name I was looking for.
Their other defensive back went pro too, third round.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was the Illini team that we were faced up against. That is a trap game of all trap games before Ohio State. And we lost Corum in that game.
And Donovan Edwards didn't play.
Yeah, so he was getting over that broken wrist or whatever club treatment he was getting to turn himself into a monster before Ohio State. Anyways, that said, that is an entirely different team than this Maryland team that Michigan just played this last week. Mm-hmm. And you want to say, it was windy? Talia was having not too much issues compared to JJ getting the ball moving down the field. In fact, the only way they were able to move the ball down the field was on the arm of Talia. But JJ, very ineffective against the Tarpons, and Michigan wasn't really able to run very well either. So all that to say is that teams can have up and downs, but these up and downs from Michigan that we're starting to see now, it just feels like different territory. This is not something that's going to, I don't know, even if it's in Ann Arbor, it's not going to be business as usual for the last 2 years. This is something completely different and something that hopefully the boys, they'll have no problem getting up for, but hopefully they're just mentally prepared to just block out that noise and continue to repeat those performances, because the past couple weeks, it doesn't look like they were totally able to block out that noise. And you got to imagine that's pretty difficult to do because they have been the object in the center of the spotlight for the past several weeks of the entire college football world, and with good reason. But I don't know, it just feels different. So I don't know what we're going to see.
I think it's a mixed bag because I think Cody Tool Time is right in the fact that historically you really could say it doesn't matter. But at the same time, I think it does matter more for less established teams. And Ohio State has Kyle McCord, who isn't really established yet. I think this is a game where he can establish himself as an Ohio State quarterback that, either he's going to be accepted or rejected basically based on this game. And the last 2 games, I think he's played some of his best football. So for a guy trying to build confidence, that's huge going into the biggest game of his career. On the other hand, we've got Sharon Moore that Cody talks about. He looked so shaky. He was playing not to lose against Maryland. Maryland won on the body language. If there's a scoreboard for body language, Maryland's players played with belief, and Michigan was kind of like, well, I hope I don't get hurt. You have to be able to manage your team's energy levels and keep it in that yellow zone. You don't want to be too comfortable in the green or too amped in the red. And I think Sherwin really failed against Maryland in that. So, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, which has really got me a little unsettled because Michigan's trending down, as Cody pointed out. I think Ohio State is trending up a little bit, although they haven't faced a test like Michigan in quite some time. So I think that probably does it for the momentum section of this. Let's just go position by position. Where do we see the edges? And if so, maybe that'll inform our decision on who's going to win this game. So, quarterback. Who do you give the edge to?
It's funny because, I mean, if you're talking about trends, Honda McCord is trending up and JJ is trending downwards. I mean, you look at just a couple weeks ago, JJ was the betting Heisman favorite. And now nobody's even talking about him in that conversation, except for if you want to say, how are you, JJ, mentally, when you know that coaching has kind of pulled you out of that race. And I think mentally, he's the type of guy that can handle that. But I have always been a proponent of you need to continue to throw the ball to keep the rust off.
Yep.
And they haven't been utilizing him that much until they need him to, and lately he hasn't been looking like his former self. So, trends-wise, I think McCord is trending up, JJ trending down. JJ has higher upside still for me. Dude can do it on the ground. Dude can gash you through the air if he's on. JJ just said that he's feeling incredible. I don't know if he'd ever say anything otherwise if you asked him. I'm pretty sure he probably said the same thing prior to the Bowling Green game. So that's a really tough question to answer. I still give the edge to JJ there, but I don't know which version of him we're going to see.
I agree with just about every single thing that you said right there, because this is probably the one that I had the toughest time picking, although I did still lean with McCarthy. The biggest thing for me is he has 2 games experience on the field against Ohio State. 2021 was limited, but he contributed and did make a couple decent passes. In 2022, he won in the horseshoe, which Michigan had not done since 2000. So I think because of that, I gave the edge to JJ, even though I very much prefer the efficiency and confidence that Kyle McCord is playing with right now. If we're just trying to say, if you were building a team from scratch and you had to select a quarterback, I would select JJ McCarthy because I've seen a ceiling that there is the potential of a higher ceiling. But as an OSU fan, I'm 100% okay with the way he's been playing the last couple games. I think it's something to be happy about for all of us. So, but I will even with that, I will still say like Kyle McCord has done nothing to let you know that he's a better quarterback than JJ. He is just simply playing cleaner, he's playing more efficient, and he has been getting all the reps in the recent games as well. There hasn't been times where they just said, hey, we're going to leave you on the field, but you're not going to pass it for 2.5 quarters. So.
All right. I'm going to keep this one short and sweet. I'm going to side with Michigan on the quarterback edge, although I do agree that JJ last game was maybe his second worst of the season, which you hate to see before Ohio State. But I think that they were coaching him with the limiter on, where they weren't calling plays to let him move, although we don't know how much of that's injury related. Hopefully we'll see a fully deployed JJ Star Destroyer. And McCord's looking good, but I will stick with Michigan. We'll go into running backs. This one's a little bit controversial, I think, because Michigan fans might get after me. I think the hottest running back right now is Trevion Henderson. I think
Agreed.
If you're going to take one guy, you might take him. But the room itself, I think you're definitely taking Michigan because you're getting two guys that are both very high level. Donovan has been off this year, but he is rounding into form. Had one of his best games of the season against Penn State. I expect they'll weaponize him a little bit against Ohio State. So I'm going to still pick Michigan, even though I'm going to admit that I think the best running back in the game is TreVeyon Henderson.
I would agree with you right there. I think this question, I mean, it's probably going to be the case with all the position groups that we talk about, but there's so many other factors that go into this. When you talk about, at the beginning of the season, Penn State fans all just wanted to talk about who had the better running backs. And at the end of the day, Singleton, a monster, but Michigan had the better O-line. So you would never see that type of production from Penn State. In the past few years, Michigan has had the better O-line, and so you get better production from the running backs. This year, Michigan's O-line has not been anything like the past 2 years. So typically, like you said, Bran, Michigan fans would get after us. You would think this would be a massive edge to Michigan, but we have not been able to get the production out of Edwards and Corum that we expected at the start of the year. And Henderson, finally feeling healthy, really coming into form, really kind of taking on bell cow type of responsibility for Ohio State. As long as he stays healthy and they continue to lean on him, that's going to be a major issue for Michigan this weekend. And so I think I still give a slight edge to Michigan, like you said, just because there's a little bit more depth there. But man, if you're just talking about who's hot right now, Henderson's got to be number one.
If we're allowed to do this, I did put a split on this one.
Yeah, that's a push.
Yeah, that's totally allowed. I was going to do that for
I put that
down the road.
Basically the exact same reasons you guys did. And the reason why I was willing to put it a split is because Chip Trayanum's not the worst number 2 running back out there. He's fine, nothing special, but I mean, he's actually fairly decent in the pass game. I think he's actually underrated in the pass game. He's really good at splitting out. He's got good hands, and he's able to take contact and stay up right when he catches it. But yeah, I fully believe that Henderson is the best running back going into this game. He's the hottest. He looks the fastest. He looks the strongest right now. Corum and Edwards, I know they're very, very good backs, and I would still call them the best duo in the country. I think that's still without a doubt. But I mean, every game that Henderson's been back, he's breaking something for a long run, no matter who it is. He's been doing it all year. He did it against Notre Dame. So basically every game Henderson's been in this year, he is breaking it for a long run. If he had been healthy this entire season, I have a strong feeling he probably would win the Doak Walker Award. Because Ollie Gordon at other OSU, is really starting to drop off right now. He is really kind of crumbling ever since that Oklahoma game. So, but at minimum, Henderson would probably be the second best running back in the country this year. So I'm going to go split. Because if you're talking the totality of the group, Michigan still has just the best group, but OSU's got the best back.
And I think that's totally fair because, it's a new year and things are a bit different this year than they were the last year. Nobody's talking about, maybe some about Blake Corum in the Heisman conversation just because there's a lot of people that are just trying their best not to win the Heisman this year. And Blake is still leading the entire NCAA in rushing touchdowns, but he does not look the same after he tweaked that knee. What you were saying about Chip Trayanum, you could probably say the same things about Donovan Edwards. A good receiving back. He's, he can make some plays here and there, but he has not been special this year. And so we give them a bit of an edge because we know what they were able to do in years past. And Donovan Edwards with a pair of huge plays for Michigan in the game last year. So we know what they're capable of. Haven't necessarily seen it this year. So you'd love to see it this weekend. But if you're just comparing it straight up this year, I could totally see the argument of trying to give that edge to Ohio State.
All right, let's go to the next one, and we'll keep this one quick because I think it's not debatable. Wide receivers, we give the edge to Ohio State. As Tool Time said, they might have one of the best wide receivers on the planet on their team, regardless of league. The guy is, I've said it before, I'll say it again, he's not human. And I think they should test him because there's alien DNA in there. His body moves in a way that's not of this earth. And so, Marv, go back to wherever you came from, dude. It's not here. It's cheating. Gravity doesn't work the same. Just his ability, it honestly is freaky. So Marv the Martian, go back to Mars, please. Ohio State, wide receiver edge. Michigan really has, I think, one wide receiver that you have to respect. That's Roman Wilson. He got dinged up against Maryland. We're expecting him back. But Cornelius Johnson has really been a disappointment this year. I think he's kind of how Cody described Chip Trainum. Like, he's fine. He had a great game last year, but I don't know that I would expect anything approaching that again this year.
If I were to call out somewhat of an X factor, I would say keep an eye on Samaj Morgan, because Ohio State, they are going to key in on Roman Wilson, and we're going to need somebody, if Michigan is going to get the dub, to really break out and have a truly remarkable performance. And they've shown that they like to use Morgan in kind of like a gadget type of way. You know, they'll hit him with a bunch of sweeps, and he's been getting a lot of action as of late. Even as a freshman, shows quite a bit of talent. And like you said, Cornelius Johnson has been a little bit of an underperformer this season. So keep an eye out on Morgan. If Michigan's going to have a chance, I think he's going to be a part of it.
Ironically, with wide receivers, you could say the same thing with Ohio State. Because as Michigan is going to have to key in on Marvin Harrison Jr., and at the same time, you have to know where Emeka Ibuka is on the field. There's also a chance that it creates a lot of open space and opportunities for Carnell Tate, our freshman number 17. And a few of my friends were talking about, we're wondering if this will be similar to 2018 when Michigan had to care for Paris Campbell and Scary Terry and that group of receivers, that Chris Olave kind of just broke onto the scene out of nowhere. You know, he had some catches during the year, but Chris Olave went crazy in that game. And so we're kind of wondering, if all of them are taken up, can Carnell Tate kind of be the next guy to show himself as a freshman? Can he even get the chances? And that doesn't even talk about Julian Fleming, who on any other team in the Big Ten outside of Ohio State and probably Michigan, I think Roman Wilson would probably still be a number one receiver over Fleming. But every other team in the Big Ten, and probably even most teams around, Fleming would be the number one receiver. He is a really good route runner. He doesn't really have breakaway speed, and he doesn't make some of like the absolute spectacular catches, but he's a very, very quality route runner. That's the thing he does really, really well. So I'm curious if Tate especially, but maybe even Fleming as well, if those guys get a decent amount of targets, because Michigan might just say, you cannot beat us through Harrison, you cannot beat us through Ibuka, we dare you to try something else. So I'm curious if those guys get their chances in the game.
All right, clean sweep there for Ohio State. This one's a little tighter. Tight end. I think we've got a similar situation with the running backs. I think Ohio State is going to say Cade Stover is the best tight end in this group. I still like the upside of Colston Loveland, but I understand that Cade Stover love. I think they're both similar, that they're more receiving tight ends. Cade Stover, if you get him outside blocking, I don't really love him. And you could say the same for Colston Loveland. On the other hand, Michigan does have some really good blocking tight ends outside of Colston Loveland in A.J. Barner. And I don't know if you want to lump him in with tight ends or call him a fullback, but Max Bredesen is a fantastic blocker as well. So I'm giving the tight end edge to Michigan, but it's very slight because I have a lot of respect for the weapon that is Cade Stover.
I think if you're thinking which of the tight ends is going to be a bigger factor, I would lean on Loveland. On account of kind of necessity. Ohio State has a lot of firepower in that receiving core, as we just discussed. If you lock up Roman Wilson, that's pretty much all JJ's got. And he likes to rely on Colston Loveland. The two have a good relationship, and I think he's going to be leaning on him quite a bit. Cade Stover does show that upside. I just don't think it's going to be as necessary. But if you're just talking about head-to-head, position for position, I do think it might be a little bit of a push. So I could go either way, but I might lean push on that one.
I lean to Michigan. I think they have not only more depth, but I think they have more proven depth at this point of the season. Our backup tight end is G. Scott Jr., who was recruited as a wide receiver, but he was just a big fella. And we said, if you want to get on the field one day, you're going to have to be that. So he put on some weight. He learned how to block, learned that position. And then our third one, Josh Royer, has been hurt the entire season. So there really is no tight end outside of Cade Stover getting significant time. And Cade Stover's a freak. He's humongous. And I love Cade Stover. I think he might actually be better than Jeremy Ruckert. I think there is a chance that he is. And Ruckert was a really good receiving tight end. But I would still lean Michigan. I think at minimum, Stover and Loveland are neck and neck. And I would totally be willing to hear and agree with any argument that put Colson Loveland ahead of Cade Stover. And Michigan's got more depth in bigger moments in terms of both having to catch the ball, but also just blocking and being on the field in crucial moments. If you watch Ohio State, whenever they try to power run, they actually use their receivers. We keep the receivers on. Emeka Egbuka is actually an incredible run blocker. And so Michigan just has the depth, the experience, and you can easily say that Loveland is probably the best tight end on the field. So I'll go UM.
All right, offensive line, a position that has been dominated by Michigan the past 2 seasons. I'm going to say I hate that I'm saying this. I'm going to say push. Right now, Michigan has a turnstile at right tackle, which honestly, it puts their offense in a box because there's no confidence for J.J. McCarthy to have a full 3-step drop and throw because he doesn't know, does his guy absolutely just get torched? Carson Barnhart has, I don't know if it's a fundamentals issue, if it's just a basic slowness issue. Multiple times he's beat off the edge with a speed rush and he doesn't lay a hand on the defensive player. I don't know if that's something that JTT is going to use it to his advantage. Cody, Tool Time can speak to that a little bit more, but just the one issue right now, our interior is obviously very strong. I think it's the best center and guard combo in the Big Ten by far, which makes me want to lean Michigan, but with your right tackle being honestly so bad, just horrendous, it really does put a cap on what you can call offensively. And that's really how Michigan stayed in the game last year on some deep balls. You're not going to have the confidence to call it if you feel like your offensive tackle is going to get beat like a drum. So Ohio State, I don't feel great about their offensive line, but I also don't see their guys getting – I mean, they played Penn State. Kyle McCord was able to still stand back there and get throws off. Yeah, he got pressured, but it wasn't like his guys were not touching Chop Robinson. So I'll say push, which is making me want to throw up, I'll be honest.
I am actually in the same boat of wanting to throw up because I'm going to give that edge to Ohio State because I do think that Carson Barnhart is that much of a liability at the moment. I mean, and that's adding on to the fact that we are, as an offense, already averaging 1 yard less per carry compared to last season. Mm-hmm. So the run game has not been as efficient. But now, it doesn't look like we're able to pass the ball with confidence. I mean, sure, we're not going to be facing an edge rusher as dominant and fearsome as Chop Robinson, I don't think, on this Ohio State defensive line. That said, I mean, even against the Maryland Terps, we just really did not have any confidence throwing the ball. And when you can't throw the ball, it's going to allow Ohio State to just key in on the run. And I don't think Michigan's going to really have much... I mean, that's kind of keen on how I already believe the matchup's going to go. I think they're going to struggle quite significantly with either the run or the pass. That just changes everything, taking away one of your dimensions like that. And so, Ohio State, I'm not sure, like you mentioned, Bran, if they match us on the interior, but I don't think they have any glaring issues like that. And I think like they are doing enough that it doesn't become that much of an issue. So I give a slight edge to Ohio State.
I did also pick Ohio State. Very, very, very close. And I do think part of it is what has attributed in the past couple weeks with Michigan having to shuffle guys around. There's at least one injury, not two, or it might be two if I'm not mistaken. You guys can correct me on that if I have it wrong. But the big thing that Ohio State has had is we have played the same 5 guys all season long. And the one thing you can say, even though it's not anything monumental, it's not a feared offensive line, they have gotten better throughout the season. They have gotten better. They've improved, and you can see a difference since Travion Henderson has been back. I think they've been growing confidence in the fact of being able to see him get to the second level and see him break it. And the offensive line does have the ability to give Kyle McCord enough time, because with the receivers we have, we don't have to run these like super long routes, or because of these receivers, sometimes you can throw the ball early and rely on them to find the ball late and still get it. So it would not shock me at all if Michigan's line played better in the game, just because it's the way it's been the last 2 years. But I do think at this moment, OSU's offensive line is better set up to succeed because we've played the same 5 guys all season, and they have not really dropped. They've just very, very slowly gotten a little better because I think we had good competition spaced out throughout the season in Notre Dame, and then when we played Maryland, because when we played Maryland, they were 5-0, feeling really good about themselves. We had to go to Camp Randall. We played Penn State. I think those games were well spaced out for Ohio State to get growth throughout the entire season. So not the most amazing OSU line, but I'm just barely comfortable enough with them right now that I do expect them to at least be able to give Kyle McCord time, but I also know that they're not perfect, and it's not going to be things where they don't have things break down. They will have times where things break down and they get beaten.
That's probably one of the first position groups to maybe shock the listener. Offensive line, we have collectively given the edge to Ohio State. Defensive line, I think you could say, is one of the strongest position groups on both teams. So either way you push the edge, you're looking at a very strong position unit. I'm going to give the edge to Michigan. I think the interior defensive line of Michigan is possibly the best in the nation. Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham they look to me like what I'm used to seeing a Georgia interior defensive line look like. I mean, just mammoth guys who have speed that doesn't make sense and are constantly in the backfield. On the edges, Michigan has been good. Obviously not to the levels we've seen with like Aiden Hutchinson or David Ojabo, but they have gotten the job done. And so I'll give the edge to Michigan, although Ohio State, their edge guys, you've got JTT, you've got Jack Sawyer, and then Tyleek in the middle. I think he's probably been Ohio State's maybe best defensive player. Tool Time, you can maybe tell me if I'm off base there, but it's a absolutely phenomenal defensive line that is, both these lines are going to give the offensive line fits.
Yeah, I'm with you, Bran. That's a tough one to call, but I think both are. They're going to give the offensive line fits, like you said. But I do think when you look at just teams able to get pressure on the quarterback, Michigan has the slight edge there. I don't think it's going to be necessarily one person that does that. Like you said, it's not necessarily like star power like Hutch or Ojabo. It's going to be coming from all around. That's something that Michigan has been doing quite well throughout the season, is just making quarterbacks uncomfortable. And I don't believe in the slightest that Ohio State won't be able to do the same thing, but I do think it's something that Michigan does slightly better. I actually think that, I don't know, I think that Ohio State is actually going to do a better job of bottling up the run, despite the strength of Michigan's interior line. So it does make it lean a little bit towards push territory as well. But I think it's something both teams do well. I think it's something Michigan does slightly better. For sake of time, Michigan slight edge.
I agree. I'm not going to repeat anything you guys already said. The one thing I'll add on is I think Michigan's defensive line creates a lot more. The Maryland game is a great example. Look to the play that turned the fumble into the touchdown, and then also look at the first safety that they got as well. I think OSU's D-line has been very stout. I think JTT and sometimes even Sawyer have shown the ability to get to the QB. Whatever it is, JTT just loves the Penn State game. He just always shows out in that game. I would agree with Tyleik Williams. And if you even asked other OSU fans, we'd probably say we think Mike Hall, our other defensive tackle, is possibly our second best performing defensive lineman this season. Just like you guys, we like our defensive tackles a lot. But Michigan has proven that they're creating more. They get more turnovers, they get more points, they get more sacks, and to me, at the end of the day, that speaks for itself. Ohio State's got great talent, and it has shown up in the final score. I think the strength of our defensive line shows up in the final score in terms of points and total yards. But in terms of things like sacks and tackles for loss and stuff like that, Michigan is decently far ahead, if I'm not mistaken, in that category. And so for that performance, I'll give Michigan the win there.
Yeah, I was trying to find that stat, and I did. It looks like Michigan's ranked 38th in the country in sacks per game. Ohio State's 83rd.
All right, let's move on to linebackers. I'm just going to go quick. I think this is a push. I think both teams are solid at linebacker. Michigan, I really like their linebackers, but we are down our linebackers coach. Unfortunately, I think that does have an impact. We probably had our worst linebacking performance in his absence against Maryland. And Ohio State's linebackers, they're dogs. Eichenberg is legit. Your other guy is Steel Chambers and Cody Simon. So I think they're very good. For Michigan, Mike Barrett has honestly in his sixth year, kind of crazy to say, a sixth-year senior playing his best ball. And then, of course, Colson, what's his Junior Colson for Michigan. He's just been solid. I feel like he hasn't been as explosive as he has been, but hopefully he's saving it up for Ohio State. But I'm just going to say push. I think both units are solid.
I'm going to go slight edge OSU, just because I do think losing Partridge has quite an impact. I said from the beginning, I think momentum just is different with all that's been happening to Michigan. I think it does have an impact. So studs on both sides. I think the depth at linebacker is pretty strong, but I do think that hurts Michigan. Like you said, coming off the worst possible linebacker performance of the year for Michigan, it's tough to do that and then go in and have a stalwart performance against the best team you'll play this year. So I give that slight edge to Ohio.
I believe this is the first time we have three different answers. So I am still going to go with Michigan. I think they're better athletes. I think they're faster. I think they cover more. I think they have Michigan's linebackers are better in terms of all around and being able to help and run, pass rush, and pass defend. The only linebacker that I trust for Ohio State in a pass defense is Steel Chambers. I don't really trust Tommy Eichenberg in that if it's not within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. Pretty much the same for Cody Simon, but Ohio State's linebackers are run stuffers for sure. They hit gaps, they sit in there, and they're not afraid to lay it down. But I think the athleticism and the overall abilities that Michigan's linebackers have, I think they have more than OSU does. They probably have a little bit more depth there as well. I know it's not exactly what Michigan fans maybe thought their group would do, but at the same time, when you have a really, really great season in one position group and then they're slightly below, we often see that as a failure when, the year before it might have just been that good. And this year they're still quality. It's just, it's been a little different. And part of it might be was Michigan just was kind of sleepwalking through this season. They didn't have to do anything until 2 weeks ago. That was when they finally had to take a team seriously for the first time. So I do think Michigan still has better linebacker room.
All right, that brings us to the secondary. We're going to combine cornerbacks and safeties, and I'm going back and forth on this one. I think I'm going to say push. Michigan, I haven't fact-checked it since Maryland, but they went into that game with the number one pass defense in the country. They did not dominate against Maryland, so I don't know if they continued that to have that stat be true, but Ohio State has been fantastic. They have really changed the narrative. It last couple of years they fell off in the defensive backs, and this year, boy, Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, I know they love Sonny Styles over there. I think it's two secondaries that are elite, and so I'm going to say push. And really, I can't give one. I almost want to lean Ohio State, but I'll say push. I think it's too close to call for me.
I'm going to say push as well. Simply put, you just don't pass on these teams unless you're Michigan and you're playing Maryland, and it's week 11. So I do think very elite teams, top of the nation in pass defense, and it's really difficult, I would say, when you look at the toughest teams both these guys have played is probably Penn State, and how much can we really use Penn State as a true test when Aller really struggled. Did he really struggle because, those teams were that elite in the secondary? Probably. But
Aller's
also, we
trash.
don't also know. I mean, he looked terrible. Yeah, so I don't know. I do believe they're very elite, but it's very difficult to also compare what they've done so far when these two teams do stand so far above the rest of the competition in the Big Ten that they've faced so far. Ohio State has Notre Dame, at least in the non-conference. Notre Dame's kind of underperformed relative to what we thought as well. So you don't throw on these two teams, both a push, and I guess we'll see on Saturday.
Yep. I will kind of break that. I will say Ohio State. I do want to give Michigan their credit first. They've got two guys in that secondary that are day 2 NFL draft at minimum, potentially even pushing day 1. As much as I don't like to say nice things about Michigan players, Mike Sainristil is probably one of the best stories in college football in just terms of where he started his career and where he is now. I think you guys could probably all agree he might be your team MVP this season so far. Sainristil has just been a great player for you guys, especially after making a positional switch, starting on the offensive side of the ball. And he is the heartbeat. He is the leader of that team. That's the sense that I get when I watch that. Will Johnson is a great corner. But I think Ohio State has guys just as good, and I think Ohio State has the depth in terms of guys experienced and young guys as well. Anytime that Lathan Ransom and, Josh Proctor, either of them have battled injuries, especially with Ransom out for the year, insert Sonny Styles, and you could actually almost argue that we're better. Sonny Styles is just a young kid. He's in his second year, and he just turned 18 years old. He's a very, very young kid. But he has massive, massive potential, and he's already flashing it this year. Denzel Burke is a lockdown corner. Davison Igbinosun, he does good, but he's got that SEC grit. Because everything he does, you're always like, is that pass interference or is that not pass interference? But that's just the kind of mentality that he plays with. Jordan Hancock is probably the best playmaking corner we have. He's leading the team in interceptions, and he's got a couple touchdowns on the year. And then we've got a freshman that we trust in Jermaine Matthews, who we're kind of hoping is starting with Burke, but bring it all the way down to Matthews. We're kind of hoping that it's bringing back that BIA that we were having for a little bit, that best in America. Michigan's got guys, but kind of like what I said about Michigan's linebackers having more depth, I think OSU has more depth in the secondary, and I think that gives us the edge.
I could agree with that. And I didn't even want to say Sainristil's name because I thought he would be disappointed in me for giving the push there. But love the shout out to my guy Mikey. That's my Wolverine.
Last position group, special teams. I think this one's pretty easy for me. I'm going to give it to Michigan. Against Maryland, maybe our MVP, Tommy Doman, our punter. Pinned the terrapins on the half-yard line, and the next play was a safety. Ohio State, we'll see. Maybe they've got something up their sleeve, but I've been underwhelmed by their special teams. So I think that in a game that might come down to field position, I'm giving that edge to Michigan.
I do have a question, though. Can Ohio State field a punt without allowing it to bounce 20 yards first? Because
we're fielding the punts. We just don't return them.
That is significant. In a game like this, the under's like 46 and a half. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. The position battle is going to be a very important factor in this. And so, that's true. Doman has been very, very solid this year, but I almost lean Ohio State in this one.
I'm going Michigan just because their special teams has actually done something significant in the punting game last game, and Ohio State hasn't really had to do anything. Our punter was, in the Notre Dame game where field position was huge. Jesse Merkel was fine. Our field goal kicker was 1 of 2 in that game, and so he, didn't have a chance to hit a big one when he could. So Ohio State hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't done anything to fail on special teams this year. But there is not one standout play from our kick returners or punt returners or our punters or kickers. Like, there isn't anything that just stands out this year. They're not really doing anything significant or insignificant. They just exist, while Michigan's got a couple moments that you can, like I said, in not only in the punts, putting them deep, but in the safety on the block punt, right? So, Michigan's they've actually done things of significance on their special teams. So I would give that nod to Michigan.
And you know what? That fielding the punt issue, I feel like more or less has been resolved. I just am really holding a grudge over how long that took.
Yes.
So I think y'all swayed me. I think I will go Michigan on that one.
And I did not put this in the prep, but we have to address it. Who has the coaching edge? Because we are looking at last 2 years. Ryan Day coached, I think, scared and pretty much just poorly against Michigan. And now we're looking at Michigan with a assistant coach. So even though Ryan Day has kind of withdrawn into his shell, I think against Michigan, I do give the edge to Ohio State just because I'm not confident in Sharon Moore as of yet. So I'll give that coaching edge to Ohio State.
Yeah, the edge has to go to Ohio State. I'm going to have our fans calling for my head after this one. I've given so many edges to Ohio State. But if you're talking Ryan Day versus Sharon Moore, and I guess that's not like a totally fair equation because Harbaugh is still preparing the team throughout the week, right? But it does make a difference being able to make adjustments on the sideline, and he's not going to be there for that. And so I don't want to say that I feel for Ryan Day, but he receives so much criticism for how many wins he's been able to get with this program. You want to make the argument, born on third base, whatever. I'm not going to argue against that. But this guy has still done really solidly for Ohio State, and Sharon Moore is in his third appearance as a head coach. Like, that's significant. Going into a matchup with Ohio State in your third game as a head coach, and what we've seen so far, I've seen a scared coach. You want to talk about Ryan Day withdrawing into his shell. I saw in Sharon Moore a coach that was scared to try and win the game and was just wanting to just try and make sure that he didn't lose the game, which is my least favorite way to see a coach play the game of football. But I get it. You have hundreds of thousands, millions of eyes upon you, and you don't want to, let the entire organization, the entire university down. So you're not going to try anything gutsy. You're just going to stay vanilla. If you do that against Ohio State, you're going to lose. And we're going to need to see a different Sharon Moore than we saw the past 2 weeks. With Ryan Day, he's been preparing for this all year. I think he knows he can't be the same Ryan Day that he was the past 2 matchups against Michigan. And so I do think you're going to see a more aggressive Ohio State, more aggressive play calling from Ryan Day. You got the firepower. He's got to just let him use it. And I think he's going to do that. And so that's something to be of concern for Michigan. I think they definitely win or lose the coaching matchup.
Yeah, for me, can't really compare it because one's been a head coach for 5 years and has played in coached in a national championship game, and the other one is, if I'm not mistaken, this is his 6th game, isn't it? Because he had the first 3 at the beginning of the season.
No, because he only coached 1 game.
Okay,
right. So this is going to be 4 actually.
That's okay. That's what I was curious about. I didn't know if he had missed any of them there.
A good caveat or disclaimer, yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing I'm actually just curious in talking about coaches is which Ryan Day will we get? Will we get the one that has shown up the last couple years against Michigan that when his back has been against the wall, he has kind of cowered a little bit, it seems like? Or are you going to get the one that showed up against Georgia that just went balls to the walls, that was fired up, that was not afraid to take big chances? And when Georgia made big plays, he didn't let it sink it. They just continued to push through with their strengths. Because when Ohio State played Georgia, we didn't try to be smarter than them or outclass them. We literally just said you cannot guard our receivers, and all we need is Stroud to have 2.5 seconds. That's all they needed. And Ryan Day just lived in that until the last second when our kicker hit one of the worst field goals I've ever seen in my life, when we could have won that game. And so I'm wondering if Ryan Day will do that. I wonder if Ryan Day will just look at his team now and be like, you know what? I don't have to try and do anything crazy over the top. I hope that he is creative in the way that he gets the ball to Marvin Harrison, gets the ball to Ibuka, or creates space for Travion Henderson. I hope we have creative avenues of doing that, but we don't have to try and outsmart someone in the moment. We don't have to try and do something bigger than the moment. Just lean into what we do best, which is just get the ball to our receivers and create space for Henderson, and don't overcomplicate it. Like, the most simple game Ohio State has played the last 2 years was Georgia in the semifinals. We just said, where's Harrison? Or where's Ibuka? Throw the ball. Like, just do that. Like, where is he? Throw him the ball. So I'm very curious which Ryan Day, because Ryan Day is gonna feel the heat, because one of the things I actually wanted to follow up, Brandon, with the way you started this podcast was you were talking about all the things at stake in this game. And I think this is the most pivotal matchup in the Ohio State-Michigan history, even more than 2006, because there's a lot of other narratives that follow with this. Number one, Ryan Day, well, not even just Ryan Day, because of what's surrounding Michigan, the loser of this game could not be the coach next year at their school. There's a really good chance. Like, with all that's going on with Harbaugh, if they lose this game, they may just say, you know what, there's more coming, let's just clean house, let's just start over. Not saying it's going to happen, there's a chance. With Ryan Day, if he loses this again, Ohio State is bringing in a new athletic director. And a new AD just may say, you know what, I've got a guy out there I really like, I want to bring in my coach. So,
which is crazy, because y'all hit a field goal against Georgia and you probably win the national championship.
It is, but that's football today. I mean, look at Sean McVay in the NFL. He went from Super Bowl winning coach to Sean McVay was on the hot seat. Like, it can turn that crazy. Look at Doug Peterson in Philadelphia, won a Super Bowl, and 2 years later was gone. You know, it turns this quickly now in football. So, do I think either coach should lose their job because of this game? No, I don't think that at all. I think either school would be crazy, but you know, Michigan has what they're dealing with, and Ohio State has the whole thing. If you lose 3 in a row after, you know, the only game we had lost in 17 matchups was the Luke Fickell interim year. And so there's all that narrative where the fans could be calling for his head. So I think there is a really interesting that. And the other thing, too, is surrounding everything is either fan base is going to be able to get to hold on for the other one to the end of time. Ohio State, if we win, you know, we can sit there and say, hey, you guys won because you cheated. Enjoy getting them vacated at some point. Or Michigan might be able to look like, you guys look like phonies. Because we beat you just the same when we didn't have our own head coach on the sideline in the middle of one of the biggest college football controversies in a long time. So outside of even just winning the game and getting the Big Ten championship or playoff, like, there's so much more effect that could happen from this game.
And for those keeping track, I kept each of our answers, and I basically just gave the average. So if 2 people said one answer, I gave that the edge. So we do have Michigan with 5 position edges, Ohio State with 3, and a couple pushes. So that's where we land. However, some of those might be more important than others. So the last question before we get into your score predictions, what is the position group that you think is going to have the biggest impact on winning or losing the game? Is it the coaching, the quarterback, the running backs, offensive, defensive line? Let's go with Cody, Michigan Cody. What do you think the edge comes down to the most?
That's tough, because my mind instantly went to 2. When you lump in the coaching battle, I think that's way more significant than anybody gives it credit for. I do think this team has looked different without Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines. and I think that's significant. I would be hard-pressed not to pick that one, so I'm going to break the rules and pick two. I also think it's kind of weird to pick this one because I gave only a slight edge, but the O-line, I think, has been the biggest key to success for Michigan over the past 2 years. They were able to establish the run. They dominated on the ground in 2021. And then in 2022, Ohio State was so focused on stopping the run that they gave up some huge chunk plays. And if Michigan is not able to establish the run on account of a faulty O-line, that changes the entire scope of this game. And I don't think Michigan's offense is going to be able to get anything going. If they are not able to establish the run, it's going to hurt their ability to establish the pass, and Ohio State's defense is just going to have a field day. So I think Ohio State's offensive line is going to be able to do enough. They're going to open up holes for TreVeyon Henderson to be able to do his thing, and that's going to give Michigan enough trouble that they're not going to be able to keep up with it, unless the O-line shows up to play. But I think that's the biggest factor here, is that O-line battle.
Tool time.
I'm not, man, position-wise, it's really difficult to pick one because there's so many that you can go that are so close, or both of them are, doing really well, or maybe not even what we hoped for them to be. I do think it's going to come down to the quarterbacks, and not necessarily that one of them has to play game of the year, but which one is the most efficient, which one gives their players the best opportunities, and which is a better conductor of their offense. Because both teams are so good at stopping the run, they're going to have to make plays in the passing game. I honestly think it's the quarterbacks, and not that the quarterbacks have to go out and single-handedly win the game, but which one will be the most effective for their team. And so it's an interesting one because JJ clearly has the higher ceiling, but I would say McCord is probably clearly playing better at the moment. But that can change on a dime at any point. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at C.J. Stroud going into both those games, and ironically, C.J. Stroud probably played better in 2021 than he did 2022. So I do think it's the quarterback. I do think it's the quarterbacks that is the biggest. I think it's the most intriguing and the battle that's really going to separate this game.
I'm really glad I went last because I had 4 position groups circled, and you guys covered 3 of them. With coaching, offensive line, and quarterback, I was probably going to settle on quarterback, but the fourth one that I think is going to be a huge deciding factor is running back, because with the amount of love I gave TreVeyon Henderson, if he is able to be bottled up, I think Michigan has a great shot to win this game. If he's able to break a long run and really have his way, Ohio State is going to be able to pass the ball better. They'll be able to basically dictate the terms of the game. Like Cody pointed out, the offensive line being a huge factor there. Same thing with Michigan. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards need to have their best game of the season. And if they do that, it takes the pressure off of J.J. McCarthy and our offensive line pass protecting. So I'll say running backs, I'm really watching TreVeyon Henderson. If he has his best game as a Buckeye, that might be the difference between a third straight loss and the Buckeyes getting back in the win column. So that's it for our positional edges. Let's finish up with our score predictions. Let's sandwich this one more time. A Wolverine pick, a Buckeye pick, and a Wolverine pick. So, Cody, what's your pick? Your score prediction. Are the listeners going to hate you?
Yes. And I've been preparing them for that reality all the way up until this point. And I've been trying to prepare myself for it as well because the numbers have been switching back and forth in my brain. Do I want to pick the under? Do I want to pick the over? I do think it's going to be an ugly game. And so I'm waffling between 27-20 and 24-20. And ultimately, I think I am going to stick with... Wait, was that what I was going to do? No. It's going to be 27-24 is what I'm going to settle on. And I do think that Ohio State wins a tight one.
I have the same score, just flip the teams. I have Michigan.
I have the same score and flip the teams too.
I have Michigan
You're
winning.
kidding.
I have Michigan winning 27-24. Honestly, because I've said this before, Brandon, in Football Frenemies, that I think Ohio State just is what they are. They have hardly been that different. Just once they got Henderson back, it added a little bit more to what we are. I think 24 is the points that Ohio State is getting. The reason I lean to Michigan is because I think their defense is going to create a touchdown. Whether that's the defense actually getting the touchdown or Michigan gets to start inside the red zone, maybe even between the 15 and 10. So that's where I'm giving Michigan the edge on the points that puts them past. I think Michigan's defense is going to be the one that can create a touchdown. While I think OSU's defense will bottle them up, I see Michigan's being the one to do that, because we've seen if McCarthy makes turnovers, it's by the end zone. That's where McCarthy turns over the ball. It's by the end zone because he wants that touchdown pass so bad that he doesn't care who's around it. Just Brett Favre guns it in there. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's like last week. So it's very possible that McCarthy still has a turnover, but I think it's in OSU territory, close to the OSU end zone, if he does that. I think the one thing that really worries me is Kyle McCord is very susceptible to getting the ball stripped from him. And I could see Michigan get the strip sack in OSU territory, and it either going back the other way or being within the red zone.
That's unbelievable that we had the same score.
That is wild. My reasoning for picking Ohio State on top, I have two reasons. One, I think I've been pretty clear that I usually pick the worst possible outcome just to emotionally prepare myself.
Cop out.
But exactly. But also, when I think of keys to victory, I wrote down two for each. And I think that Ohio State's just seem a little bit more easily attainable. For Ohio State, they just got to get pressure on JJ, which I think teams the past couple of weeks have shown is not too difficult to do. And they also just have to bend, don't break. Last year, Ohio State gave up those huge chunk plays. So they just need to be a little bit more patient, I would say. Don't get after Michigan quite as hard. Let them have some yards, but do not give up those easy, long yardage touchdowns. And it's going to be a little bit easier this year, I think, because Michigan doesn't have as dominant of a run game. So play a little bit more conservative, I would say, defensively, and you're gonna limit the amount of touchdowns that Michigan scores. But if Michigan needs to win, they got to protect JJ, and that's something that they've been struggling with. And they got to utilize creative ways to get the ball out of his hands quickly and get it to wide receivers, give it to Donovan Edwards in speed and space. And that's something that's going to be really difficult for them to scheme around a very elite defense in Ohio State, especially when Harbaugh's not on the sidelines. So that's going to be really difficult. And they got to force McCord to beat them instead of Trevion Henderson. They got to sell out to stop the run, because I think that's going to be really effective for Ohio State. And McCord, as we said, has been trending upwards. So that is something that is a little bit scary. But ultimately, it is wild that we all have the same score. I think it's going to be a phenomenal game, is something we can all agree on.
We are very pessimistic this year. I think last year when I was on the pod going into it, I think both sides were feeling super good about the matchup. Honestly, I thought Ohio State was winning last year, and they started off hot. And you guys knew and felt it was your best time in a long, long time to win in Columbus. And man, is that just opposite this year, that we find ourselves 11-0 again in possibly a bigger game, and us are just we're very, very melancholy over this one. That we're just kind of I feel like either of us is dreading what the loss could do for us rather than what the win is going to do for us. I feel like we're both we're all so fearful of that loss than just let's get that win. Yeah, so
that's definitely part of it, but I think both teams are, missing a part of their identity that you usually cling to. Ohio State is usually this offensive juggernaut. Now they are this elite defense that you just don't score on. That is kind of your guys' identity this year, but you also are a very more than capable offense as well that can hurt you in a multitude of ways. Michigan usually just runs it no matter what, and that's something I don't know if we're going to be able to do or not. That's scary when our whole thing this year is we're going to have a more balanced offense, and JJ has just been an absolute roller coaster, and we've just shown that we're not really positive if this offense is something you're going to be able to rely on week in and week out. Who knows what's going to happen? It's just unfamiliar ground.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, either two of us are going to be really happy, or maybe two of us are going to be devastated, and one of us is going to be really happy or devastated. It all comes down to the game. Cody, do you want to take us out?
I feel like I shouldn't, because people are using up their tomatoes already with what I've said so far. I feel bad. This needs to be something that pumps the listeners up, so we'll do our best to do that. 4 hours if it's aired on Fox. I don't remember how long it goes.
10 hours.
Have 10 hours. The matchup of destiny. The most historic matchup, football game in the whole history of college football is coming to a head in Ann Arbor. The boys could not be more excited. It is going to be a heck of a game to watch. Defensive showdown, two offenses that show that they have the potential to be firecrackers. It's going to be so much fun. We thank you guys for spending the time to pregame for this game with us. We will see you in the next one. Go Blue, and hopefully we'll be chatting it up soon to discuss our matchup with Iowa. So, thank you all for joining us, and have a fantastic week. Ohio sucks. Keep it real, everybody.